There's a new technology poised to revolutionize business, a trillion-dollar industry waiting on the sidelines. It's not artificial intelligence, though AI might benefit from its commercialization. It's quantum computing, a rapidly emerging technology. And for Professor Francesco Bova, it's a huge opportunity that everyone should be keeping an eye on. And he'd know. He's been studying the economic impact of quantum technology for the past 5 years.
On top of being an associate professor here at Rotman, I'm also the academic lead for Creative Destruction Lab, and I've been the lab economist for our quantum stream. And so I think we've had 120 plus quantum startups come through the stream at that time. So we've had an opportunity to see how companies are experimenting.
In his view, you don't need to be a physicist or a mathematician to consider the value of quantum computing. And he believes it's never too early for businesses to get themselves quantum ready. Welcome to the Executive Summary. I'm Megan Haynes, editor of the Rotman Insights Hub. Let's start with some basic terminology. A classical computer, think your desktop, your laptop, even your cell phone, operates on bits, a binary code made up of zeros and ones. There is no in between. A bit is either a 0 or a 1. A quantum computer, on the other hand, has qubits, which can be anything between 0 and 1. Without getting into the physics and math, this means it can carry twice the amount of information as a traditional bit. And, along with other quantum phenomena, which probably requires a physics degree to explain, might make quantum computers faster at solving certain problems. To understand what this means for businesses, Francesco turns to the light bulb example.
And so if you have one light switch, that light switch can be either on or off. There's 2 to the power of 1 possibilities. If you have 2 light switches, the possible combinations are on, off, on. So 2 to the power of 2 possibilities. And so we can do this on and on. If you go to 3 light switches, there's 2 to the power of 3, which is 8, and so on and so forth. Classical computers, for a comparatively small number of light switches, we can go through every exhaustive combination very quickly. But this is a problem that grows exponentially more challenging to solve with every light switch that we include.
Imagine a situation with, say, 2,000 light switches.
For any classical computer in the world, no matter how big, for it to go through every single possible combination in an efficient manner is intractable. It can't do it in any sort of timely manner.
Right now, classical computers are widely available, commercialized, and utilized. We literally carry them in our pockets. And they are fast. Open up Google and you will get an answer within microseconds. Your spreadsheets will do calculations instantaneously. So it might be hard for most folks to see the big potential benefit of quantum computing, which is speed. Most of what we currently do on computers day to day is actually relatively simple. But there are problems organizations face that are considered intractable, that is too big for a traditional computer to solve in any reasonable amount of time. This is where quantum can come in.
We've got a quantum computing startup here in Toronto called Xanadu, who in the spring of 2022 were able to solve a problem in under a second that any other classical computer in the world would have taken 9,000 years to solve.
That's the quantum advantage, when a quantum computer is capable of solving an impossible problem for a classical computer. We'll talk about who should be paying attention to quantum in a few minutes, but it's important to set the stage of where we're at in terms of commercial viability. Right now, you can't pop into a Best Buy to pick up a quantum computer, and most organizations aren't dedicating R&D spend on creating quantum hardware. And the big reason is that it's not currently fault tolerant.
Quantum computers need to operate in very sterile environments in ways that classical computers don't. Quantum computers are very susceptible to noise from their external environment. Well, some of the quantum hardware needs to be frozen to almost absolute zero to provide as sterile an environment as possible.
These conditions can exist in labs, but not often in the real world. Instead, we're in what's called the noisy intermediate scale. That is to say, quantum computers work, and people are experimenting with them, but they aren't perfect, and they aren't always 100% accurate. In the meantime, a lot of researchers and companies are taking a hybrid approach, using quantum computers to develop more effective or optimized algorithms that can then be run on a classical machine. And there's a lot of investment in this space, much of which is coming from governments. Some estimates peg the funds flowing into quantum at about $35 to $55 billion, led largely by China and the US.
$50 billion sounds like a lot of capital flowing into this new nascent technology. But, Twitter, for example, I think it was purchased by Elon Musk for like 40 billion plus. And that's one social media company. So 50 billion, given that this is a nascent technology that could lead to like a $1 trillion market. I think it's comparatively small, given the size of the opportunity.
There is private investment as well, though that is harder to track. A 2019 article in the science journal Nature pegged private investment at around $1 billion, but that's likely significantly increased since then. This past year, for example, startups like OTI and Xanadu raised $55 and $100 million, respectively. In 2023, both Google and IBM separately announced a $100 million investment in university partnerships to explore the tech further.
So the private capital is clearly following.
But considering this is still a nascent technology, who actually needs to care about quantum? Well, that one's easy. Everybody. Let's start with the biggest threat we should be paying attention to, and that's encryption. A lot of our digital activity is encrypted by algorithms. It secures our banking information, it keeps our health info safe, it even protects our email. Right now, traditional computers can't break those encryptions. They're too big and too complicated. Quantum computing, however, might be able to crack the algorithms, putting a lot of our information at risk.
So, the good news is that everybody's aware of this threat. We're presumably years away from a fault-tolerant quantum computer that can break this form of encryption. The governments of the world are looking at changing algorithms and protocols that underpin, for example, the internet to ones that are going to be quantum safe.
A lot of that aforementioned $55 billion governments are investing is focused on solving this specific problem. But there is more than just doom and gloom. There's a real business opportunity in quantum. Specifically, there's a lot of opportunity for organizations that face optimization issues, like logistics companies, and for companies focused on discovery. Think pharmaceuticals or healthcare organizations. One McKinsey study estimates there's as much as $700 billion at stake for just 4 industries: pharmaceuticals, chemicals, automotive, and finance. And that $700 billion up for grabs really comes down to quantum's ability to solve intractable problems.
These are pervasive, I think, in every single industry. And so this goes back a little bit to our light switch example, right? Going through every possible combination becomes more challenging as the number of light switches I include in the problem increases, right? It grows exponentially. I go from like 2 possible solutions to 4 to 8 to 16 and so on and so forth, and it becomes intractable.
Take a pharma company trying to work through millions of molecular combinations to come up with the next medical discovery.
If, experimenting with quantum leads to quantum-inspired algorithms that allow us to create blockbuster drugs more quickly, that's something that impacts all of society. So instead of creating a blockbuster, 1 every 20 years, we're doing 2 every 20 years. There will certainly have been a societal benefit that I think will have far outweighed the cost.
McKinsey predicts that the pharmaceutical category alone will see an additional $15 to $75 billion in revenue as a result of advances from quantum computing. Or consider financial institutions, which have to contend with thousands upon thousands of data points to manage investments that change in real time.
So you could think of, for example, something like portfolio optimization. If a quantum approach can come up with an optimal portfolio subject to a number of constraints, let's say in an hour, and it takes a classical approach a week to solve the same problem, then quantum is still very valuable there because markets are dynamic, right? If I'm getting my output in an hour, that's great. I can act on it quickly. If I have to wait until Friday to get the output, by then the inputs to the problems have changed. Even if the benefit is really incremental, let's say that I can generate like 4% on assets with my current techniques, and a quantum-inspired approach can generate 4.25%. Doesn't sound like much, except that banks have just an inordinate number of assets on the balance sheet.
And imagine if your business could get to a solution just a little bit faster, or you could adapt to a problem just a little bit quicker. What, for example, might have happened if regulators had access to quantum computing powers while Silicon Valley Bank was collapsing?
When you think about financial crises, or when you think about kind of the psychology of bank runs, one of the concerns is that the market reacts more quickly sometimes than the regulators do. SBV became insolvent in a matter of 2 days.
What would regulators have done differently if they'd been able to run the data through a quantum algorithm?
If the answer is the same, but we can get it within an hour as opposed to 3 days, just given the numerate things you have to think about in the economy, the inputs that go into trying to model what the outcome is going to be, then that would be extremely valuable.
Even without a fault-tolerant computer, organizations are currently working with tech companies in this hybrid model that uses noisy quantum computers to create an algorithm which can then be run on a classical computer, which is where Francesco sees much of the immediate potential. A bank in Spain, for example, developed an algorithm on a quantum computer that can be run on a more traditional computer that allowed it to improve how it hedged against risks to its portfolio investments. Working with Canadian company D-Wave, Acacia Bank said the algorithm allowed it to complete in minutes what had historically taken it hours, which it says was a huge competitive advantage in a fast-moving, high-risk environment.
By simply experimenting with that hardware, they're able to generate and create new algorithms that they can apply on classical hardware today, right? So it's just simply through the act of experimenting with the hardware. I will argue that companies are utilizing this hardware and are creating value in the short term.
So how can businesses get quantum ready today? First, Francesco says, consider your pain points.
So you've got a stakeholder in the economy and they've got a business model and there's a pain point, right? Something that just leads them to want to pull their hair out.
For example,
if you're a logistics company and fuel costs have gone up 30%, fuel expense is now the biggest cost that is impacting your profit margin.
What if a quantum computing algorithm could help your business find the most fuel-efficient route, taking into consideration real-time traffic, construction notices, and road closures? In an MIT Sloan article, Francesco suggests business leaders make a list of if we could only just, things you wish the business could do but don't know how, or the issue feels too big to solve because it is resource or time intensive. If you have some issues in mind, quantum might be right for your business. He adds that it's important not to be daunted by the costs.
To the extent you've got an R&D department, consider experimenting, with quantum hardware today. I think it's comparatively inexpensive to call any of the quantum hardware providers. I think it's also good for them because they're also looking at where can our hardware potentially be applied. So there's a lot of synergies there.
And that's an important point. There's a vibrant community, particularly in Canada and Toronto specifically, looking at quantum. And there are plenty of startups eager to work with corporations because that's how they will commercialize and perfect their technology. Francesco encourages businesses to partner and talk with these organizations to see how they can work together.
You can help those companies illustrate the efficacy of their tech in the real world, or you can learn from the companies themselves about the state of the quantum hardware ecosystem and how to apply technology to solve those problems.
And of course, consider a more formal education on the topic to better understand the basics, such as taking a university course or an executive program, or even a quantum boot camp.
I would argue that in most cases, especially for larger companies, the opportunity cost of spending a bit of time doing these things is comparatively small relative to maybe even the short-term benefit you can generate from experimenting with this hardware.
This has been Rotman Executive Summary, a podcast bringing you the latest insights and innovative thinking from Canada's leading business school. Special thanks to Professor Francesco Bova. We'll be back in a few weeks with Assistant Professor Cindy Chan on the science behind better gift giving. This episode was written and produced by Megan Haynes. It was recorded by Dan Mazzata and edited by Avery Moore-Kloss. For more innovative thinking, head over to the Rotman Insights Hub and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.